So if you're watching this and you're not from the United States, you don't know what Mount Rushmore is. This is it. It is a mountain in the Black Hills Mountains of South Dakota that features four past U.S. presidents, two early presidents, a later president, and then one from the turn of the 20th century. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln. And it's basically these four great presidents. So it's basically used in a lot of discussions for mixed martial arts and women's divisions as well. For well, who would be on a Mount Rushmore of blah blah blah? Because it's like a symbol of greatness and achievement. So that's why it's often brought up in discussions, and it's a beautiful mountain. I've only ever seen it in pictures. I hope to see it in person someday. It's huge. I mean, it's absolutely huge. Like visitors only see it from a distance, so it always looks small. But apparently, it's huge, and they did a really nice job. It was built back in I think the 1930s, 40s. Anyway, a lot of people have done discussions about who would be on an MMA Mount Rushmore or who would be on a WMMA Mount Rushmore. So I'm gonna tonight. I want to give my take on this. A lot of people just basically name four great fighters that they like, that either they think are the best fighters, or that they think, or yeah, either fighters that they think are the best at the current time, or fighters that they just really like. To me, that's not what the symbolism of Mount Rushmore means. Like they put a lot of thought into what presidents were on there, why, and their placement. So for my WMMA Mount Rushmore, my picks, I really thought about this, and for me, it's not so much about who I was going to put on there, but why. Like for me, I had to really justify who I was going to put on. So first up, the first president of the United States was George Washington. Why is he on there? Well, because he's the first. He set the precedent for every president to come after him. He was a general in the American Revolutionary War. He was the commanding general of all the Continental Forces. Years later, when they decided on the national form of government through the U.S. Constitution, he ended up being elected the first president. Served 2 terms, and he could have kept running until he died. He said no. He said 2 terms is enough. Like he basically could have become an American king or an American dictator. And he said no, I don't want to do that. And to this day, he is often considered one of, if not the greatest of U.S. presidents. So, who is my first pick on the WMMA Mount Rushmore? For me, it was easy. I went all the way back to the roots of women's mixed martial arts. Marloes Coenen was my first pick. One of the oldest women's MMA events was the Remix 2000 Women's World Grand Prix. There was a one-night tournament of women that was held in Japan with ladies from all over the world. Open weight tournament. Marloes Coenen came out on top, including getting a flying armbar victory. I think all of her victories that night were by submission. So she set an early standard for women's MMA, and then kept going. She ended up being the Strikeforce women's bantamweight champion. When Strikeforce was getting big, and even kept going after that. Fighting in Invicta afterwards. She never got made it to the UFC. Strikeforce got bought out by the UFC, and UFC did not get along with her management over the way the fighters got paid, like the manner of how they would pay them. I'm not going to get into it, but to me, George Washington set the standard, and so in that way, so did Marloes Coon. So I put Marloes Coon in first because she was a pioneer in the women's divisions and set the standard. So to fill in the spot that George Washington would take, it was an easy pick for me. Marloes Coon, someone who I don't see in anyone else's WMMA Mount Rushmore either. Mostly because most people don't know the sport like I do. And that's not me being snobby, that's just a statement of fact. So next up we have Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was, I believe, the third or fourth president, but he was one of the architects of the United States, wrote the Declaration of Independence, had a hand in, I believe, either the Constitution or the Federalist Papers, but also greatly expanded the United States with his purchase of what was called the Louisiana Purchase, bought a huge swath of land, basically the entire Midwestern U.S. was purchased from the French by Thomas Jefferson, greatly expanding the size of the country, and then sent the Lewis and Clark expedition west. And also Jefferson, someone said it was a good thing, someone said it was a bad thing. He greatly expanded the size of the federal government. So for someone who really helped grow the United States, I had to find someone who really helped grow the women's division, someone who was responsible for so much greatness, so much goodness, and so much building of the women's divisions. I actually had to go with a non-fighter for this position. This might be the most controversial pick here. But to take Thomas Jefferson's place, I went with Invicta FC president Shannon Knapp. At a time when the women's divisions, particularly in the West, not so much in Japan, they were still doing all right in Japan at the time, but in the West, after the buyout of Strikeforce by the UFC, when no one knew what was going to happen with the ladies, a lot of ladies went to Shannon Knapp and said, "Hey, do you know of anything that can be done about this?" And Shannon Knapp got with a business partner and created Invicta FC, which greatly helped the women's divisions to grow. The Strikeforce had the featherweight division, which only had a few people, and then it had the bantamweight. Shannon Knapp expanded it, brought in the atom weights, the straw weights, and the flyweights to Invicta, and helped grow the women's divisions probably more than any other single person anywhere. I mean, period. She did so much. She did, has done, and continues to do so much for women's MMA. Does Shannon Knapp? That I mean, listen, the strawweights are in the UFC right now because of Invicta FC and showing just how great that division is. The flyweights are in the UFC, large, at least partly because of how good the division was doing in Invicta. The first, the first strawweight champ in the UFC was the first Invicta champ, Carlos Barza. Rosnama Yunus, Invicta veteran. I mean, there's just so many Invicta veterans in the UFC. Amanda Nunes fought in Invicta. A lot of female fighters currently in the UFC fought for Invicta, and Invicta puts fighters in just about everywhere. They've sent fighters to Ryzen. They've sent fighters to Korea for Road FC. They've sent fighters just about everywhere. So one thing that Shannon does is when she created Invicta, she said, "I am not going to stop, my fighters from growing their careers." And That was important too. So if there's any non-fighter that would deserve a spot on the Mount Rushmore of women's mixed martial arts, it is easily Shannon Knapp. Then we move on to a president that came halfway through the 19th century, Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln changed the U.S. in ways that are still being felt today. He was president during the Civil War, freed the slaves, basically put a midpoint for the UFC for the United States, and showed a future direction it was heading. And today, Lincoln is usually number one or two in people's lists of favorite presidents or the best presidents ever. Replacing him would be Ronda Rousey. No single fighter has helped the women's divisions grow like Ronda Rousey. Period. You may not like her. I'm not a particular big fan of her as a person. You may not like her fighting style, which is undeniable what she accomplished in the sport. Okay? You might have negative feelings about it. You might love her. Nobody can deny her effect on this sport. She's the reason women are in the UFC now. So went from you know Strikeforce having the ladies to Ronda Rousey came along, and Dana White said, "Oh, it was Ronda Rousey that made Dana White, president of the UFC, go, oh, maybe the women do have something to offer," and brought them in. And boom, it's now grown to what? 3 divisions plus a title in a fourth division that doesn't really exist. And it all started because of Ronda Rousey. She absolutely deserves a spot on the Mount Rushmore of women's MMA. I mean, it is undeniable. And she's definitely on most people's list. And it'd be moronic to not have her on. Whatever your opinions on Ronda Rousey, to not have her on the Mount Rushmore of women's mixed martial arts would just be absolutely stupid. There is no denying her greatness as a fighter, and there's no denying the effect that she has had on the sport that is still being felt today. How many years has it been since her retirement? More than 5. I think it's been at least 5 years since she retired. So yeah, 5 years. No, 6 years. Almost 6 years since she retired. People are still talking about her like crazy. And I think that, Ronda showed the heights that is there for women to achieve, the potential that is there for women to achieve. And she moved over to WWE, became a WWE superstar. Was in the Fast and Furious, one of the Fast and Furious movies. I mean, she can't act, but she was in the movie. Ronda's spot is absolutely, positively undeniable. So finally, we have the man with the glasses you can barely see. You need to enlarge it here. See, he's got little wire frames on. Theodore Roosevelt. So Theodore Roosevelt was the U.S. president at the time of the change from the 19th century, the late 1900s to the 20th, or late 1800s to the 20th century, the early 1900s. So he was a time of, at the time the U.S. was over a century old or a century and a half old, and the turn of the 20th century was a time of great change around the world. And Roosevelt was a well-liked president, did a lot of great things. He's known as a trust buster, busted up big companies, created the National Parks Service. He was a nature lover. But more importantly, like he represented a look to the future for America. And that's why out of everybody on the mountain, if you go back a few slides, Everybody's facing basically one certain direction. Teddy Roosevelt is facing a completely different direction. He's looking forward to the future. That's the symbolism there, is that he's looking forward to the future. So who would I pick that represents the future of the women's MMA division? That shows just what is achievable both as skills as a fighter and popularity wise, and represents both the present and the future, and is what shows what we can look forward to seeing more of in the future. I picked Valentina Shevchenko. That's the best picture I could have used, but it was hard to get in a picture of her looking to the right. Um, Valentina is a great fighter, amazing fighter. There's no denying it. I'm not a fan. I mean, I'm not a particularly big fan of hers, but there is no denying her skills as a fighter. She is a fighter that absolutely can do it all in fights, and I think she just shows like this is what we have to look forward to more of in the future. There's going to be fighters like her that can do it all and look great doing it all. And she's very popular. I mean, she's not like a pay-per-view star, but she has a very big fan base, very vocal. So to me, for someone that's looking, if we're going to show someone that's looking ahead to the future and representing what we have to look forward to, it was Valentina Shevchenko. So that is it for my women's mixed martial arts Mount Rushmore. We've got the pioneer, the President Center in Marlis Kunin. We've got the builder, the great expander in Shannon Knapp. Even though she isn't a fighter, she helped grow the sport or grow the women's divisions like no other. We've got, the midway point right now in Ronda Rousey, person that basically shook the divisions to the core and caused great change and positive change for the women's division in a way that Lincoln did. And then the one representing a look to the future in Valentina Shevchenko. Like I said, my Mount Rushmore is not just going to be a pick of, oh, my four favorite fighters or the four fighters with the best records or who I think are the four best fighters. No, to me, if I was going to do a Mount Rushmore of women's mixed martial arts, it had to be done right. And to me, it had to represent the symbolism of Mount Rushmore. So that's my presentation on. That's who I think belongs on.